Cool. Well, hi everyone. I'm Paul Ganssle, and for my day job, I'm a software developer at Google. But as will soon become clear, it turns out then that when the workday is over, I actually continue to be a software developer, believe it or not. And that's the subject of today's talk, the benefits of using your technical skills for your own pursuits. Because here's the thing, we live in a technologically advanced world. And as Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is essentially indistinguishable from magic, which means that you are a wizard. A sorcerer. Think about it for a second. You invoke arcane commands, you summon demons, D-A-E-M-O-N-S, to do your bidding. You perform unprecedented acts of divination by calling APIs. But the people in the world of Harry Potter, Harvey Palmer, are not training the students of Pigswort to be corporate drones using their magic to deliver shareholder value, right? Their magic suffuses their daily life. And similarly, I think it's a bit sad that so many people build impressive skill portfolios at work, but they don't see the dozens of opportunities around them to use their programming skills to make their day-to-day life like a bit better, or maybe just a bit more magical. Some time ago, I came across an article that proposed a metaphor that really resonated with me, which is apps as home-cooked meals. And by apps, I'm thinking broadly, any kind of programming, right? And in this article, Robin Sloan talks about a messaging app that he built and maintains just for his family's use. And this metaphor draws attention to the fact that none of us thinks anything of going out and preparing a meal for your family. You have to go buy all this stuff and things. And you might get some great joy from it, right? But despite the fact, and you do this despite the fact that you could go to a restaurant and have a professional chef cook you this thing, right? Or you could buy prepackaged food, which has great economies of scale. It's got to be cheaper, right? And nor does anyone think anything about everyone having their own collection of homemade recipes. Why aren't these recipes being published? Why aren't they monetized, huh? No, that sounds kind of absurd. But still, building and maintaining a messaging app just for your family's use seems also a bit absurd in a weirdly contradictory way, despite the fact that it probably actually takes less time than cooking a meal for your family every week, which sounds perfectly pleasant. Okay, so one of my projects that I think really illustrates this home-cooked meal idea is the chord identification method trainer that I built. A few years ago, I came across this article from a Japanese music school, and they claim to have a method for consistently teaching children between the ages of 2 and 6 to have absolute pitch. Sometimes it's called perfect pitch. And it works by having them identify a series of chords, and they get better and better at that. The child does 5 sessions of 25 identifications every day. Each session is very short, true, but this requires that I would be near a piano with my son 5 times a day. It also requires me to generate in my head like long sequences of randomly chosen piano chords and then execute them perfectly. And then they also recommend that you keep records. Obviously, none of this is going to happen, right? But it is always around, basically, and can make sounds and is really good at generating pseudo-random sequences and keeping tracks of like lots of information. Computers, tablets, phones, and luckily, as we've established, as a programmer, I hold dominion over computers, and I can bend them to my will. Now, normally, the computers that I bend to my will are not web applications, but web applications seem like the easiest thing to do because I was going to deploy it to tablets, and I didn't know if we were going to buy an iPad or Android tablet, and maybe we'd use it on the phone. So what I did was, I went online, I found an online piano, and I hooked it up to my laptop. I recorded myself playing a bunch of chords, and I whipped up this little web app, and it uses a static site generator and some JavaScript. And it's very simple, and we started using it with my son's tablet. Now, unfortunately, I had a little bit of trouble getting my son to feel motivated by making a number go up. So obviously, I needed to add cats. So now there's a kitty whose emotions reflect how well you're doing. Well, if you get an answer right, she's got hearts in her eyes. If you get an answer wrong, she's, oh, I'm very spooked. And also her general emotional state depends on how well you're doing overall. She goes from happy to mad to sad. Now, I think this is an example of something that was actually quite fun to build because my son and I were working together to build something. I was responding to his needs, and he's someone I care about very much. He also had very strong opinions about other features, like, how we should indicate what a perfect score was. What should that bar in the middle be green or not? And sometimes he would make feature requests, and then like a week later, he'd be like, "Papa, what the hell? I asked for this feature last week. Where is it? We're halfway through the sprint." Now, he's already a good taskmaster, but he's also a good hacker. You see, this provided some excellent opportunities for parental pride when I got to see my son's inner hacker. You see, when I first threw together the app, it was pretty janky. It was not designed for the kid to use themselves. That's not, well, anyway. But eventually, my son got good enough, he knew the rules, and he wanted to do it himself. And when he did, he improved so fast. He was getting perfect scores on a 3-chord level, like, immediately. But then it became clear that he could only do this when he was alone in his room because he had discovered this bug, which is that I didn't make any differentiation between the levels. So you could go to level 1, get a perfect score, and then put it on whatever level you want. So you go in, do it on level 1, and then come in and be like, "Papa, perfect score on level 3. Let's go get ice cream." So yeah, it really brings a tear to your eye to see the next generation of hacker growing up. The other thing that's great about this project is that it's given me lots of opportunities to connect with my son. At some point, I wanted to make a little video to put on YouTube and explain how to use the app. And my son was super excited to do it. He wanted to show off that he knew how to do it. He wanted to be on YouTube. And he wanted to show that he was getting better and better at chord identification. And then last March, I put together a presentation about this project that we gave at the Nerd Summit. And my son was able to join me on stage to help demonstrate the app as part of the talk. It was really fun. Like, he got to feel the pride of his accomplishments. It was his first time presenting at a conference. Plus, it didn't hurt that we got to stay in a hotel that had a pool. And with this project in particular, I'm often asked like whether it's something I'd like to start selling or build a business around. And my answer is basically always no. I'm not saying it would be wrong for me to want to make money from my work, but I don't want to worry about prioritizing user features or something that drives engagement or retention. I'm happy to do something that is like cooking a meal for my family, right? It's something that helps me engage with my family and it's fun for me. And I have heard from other parents who have been using the app. So I don't have any metrics because, again, that would go counter to the philosophy. So I'm not going to try and put Google Analytics on my app. But it's nice to know that other families are also able to use this app to connect, get some joy out of it, teach their kids to have perfect pitch. Okay, at this point, it would be unfair of me to tell you that I built this app 2 years ago and then not tell you how it's been going. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I would say that it's going okay. He can consistently identify 13 chords, and he's really good at it, as you'll see in this video. He doesn't seem to be able to identify individual notes, though. And according to the book, that should just sort of have already happened naturally. So I don't know if he's going to get perfect pitch later, or if he just doesn't know the names of the notes or what. But what he can do is already quite impressive. So take a look.
Yellow CFA, black ACF, lilac B flat, AC heavy, lilac B flat DF, blue BDG, lilac B flat DF.
All right. And now, in exchange for his participation in this video, I have agreed to tell you all about his YouTube channel to further his goal of getting 1 million subscribers. So it's Time Panda Max on YouTube, and he also has a Twitch thing there. So if you're interested in watching a 7-year-old play Portal 2 or Minecraft, go ahead and smash that bell. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But seriously, it is actually kind of wholesome entertainment, and I'm sure he's gonna get better at it because he's already quite an entertainer. Okay, so the next project I'd like to show you is something that I built primarily for myself. But understanding why I care about it takes a bit of explanation. You see, I listen to a lot of audio content, a mix of audiobooks and podcasts, that kind of thing. And specifically, I usually try to listen to about 1 hour of an audiobook, and then about an hour of a podcast, and then an hour of a different audiobook, and that repeats. And then also about like 18, 20 months ago, I started learning Spanish. So now I've started alternating between English and Spanish content. So the reason I do it this way is because in comparison to like binging it all in a row, I find that interleaving different concepts helps you retain them better, because you listen to a little bit, then you have to change gears, then you have to remember it later, and you can sleep on it before you have to engage with the ideas again. The problem, however, is that a lot of applications treat podcasts and audiobooks as fundamentally different things. They're expecting you to go to an audiobook application, listen to an entire audiobook or something, and then you switch to a podcast application and you listen to a podcast. And that's not how I want to do things. But about 10 years ago, I realized that if I just have a bunch of audio files on a computer, I can create an RSS feed for them. And I can turn all my audiobooks into podcasts. So they'll work with whatever podcast player I want. And the first version of it was, again, janky as hell. That's a theme that we're going to come back to. I would, from time to time, run a script that generates an HTML page with QR codes and a RSS feeds on it. The QR codes are necessary because this is not mobile friendly. As you can see, there is no CSS, no pagination. It's just a bare list of stuff. And not only is it a bare list of stuff, it's a hand-coded list of stuff. All the books are in a dictionary, and probably, because this was Python 2, in a random order every time I generated it. So not only was I manually running it, I was manually adding book information, but it worked. It generated a page with a rudimentary RSS feed, and I could use it, and it was great. I think pretty soon after that, I don't actually know because I have no Git history this early on in the project because it was all very YOLO. I got tired of manually adding all the book information, and the number of books I had was getting unwieldy for a single page. So what I did was I added something that automatically parses the names from and authors from the folder names, and then it retrieves descriptions from Google Books, and it breaks it up into multiple pages. But it was still a static page, and it was still manually run, but it was considerably more ergonomic. And a few years after that, I didn't want to keep having to manually run the updater, and I realized that I wanted some more dynamic features that wouldn't fit with a static site. And despite having worked as a professional developer for several years at this point, I barely knew how to do any kind of dynamic website. I didn't know how to use SQL. But I had an interesting problem to solve. So over Christmas break, I looked up how to use Flask. I punted on the SQL and used a YAML file as my database. And then I created and deployed a version of the app that has nice mobile support. It has different options for sorting and pagination. And it automatically updates itself with some cadence. Now, this is a weird thing. Okay. And I've been maintaining some version of this app for a decade now. And I think it's a striking example of how your projects and your abilities can grow in a mutually reinforcing way. When this project started causing problems with updates because of how I was deploying it, I Dockerized it. And then I've been using Docker all over the place for lots of different things because of this. It's something I learned from the project. And similarly, at work, I started using sort of SQL and SQL-like things more. And so I felt more comfortable with that. And so I ditched the YAML file in favor of SQLite. So it's available. I made it for me, but you can get it. Apparently 18 people have started. So you're welcome to use it if this sounds appealing to you. But the other thing that I think this app demonstrates is how valuable it can be to build something valuable to you, to build something that you can tailor to your own needs. So for example, eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that in the latest version, there are actually 3 RSS feeds for book. And the reason for this is that I get audiobooks from various sources, and they're not always in exactly the same format. Sometimes they're in one giant file, and this is supposed to be to represent the file. Sometimes usually you have chapter information about the file, right? So you'll have one giant file, and you'll know where all the chapter breaks are. So you could break up the file if you wanted to at those chapter boundaries and know that you're not breaking up in the middle of a sentence or something. But if you do that, you're going to end up with like a bunch of small files. I also don't like having a bunch of small files. You'll probably get some that are too long as well, but there's not much I can do about that. And eventually how I solved this problem was, it's probably my favorite part of the whole application. And it's the thing that breaks up big files and merges small files. So what I want is something that makes these files about an hour long. It's okay if they're a little bit longer. I prefer it if they're not too much shorter. And if you were to do this in the greedy way, you'd get something like this, right? You just keep going until you get past 1 hour, and then you move on to the next file. But like, I don't know, that 35 is way too short for me. Despite the fact that it's after 93, I would prefer a 2-hour file than a 35-minute file. And that 93 and 73, you could split the 8 there much better. Obviously, you're not doing the math on this, but trust me, that's how it works. And so what I did was I have something that now takes a cost function, and what it does is it tries out all the different combinations, and it says, okay, which combination of files, like which ways to join it, minimize the total cost function. And this is an arbitrary cost function. So I can write anything and it'll take like, here's the length of the file and here's my ideal file. And in fact, the default is asymmetric. I think it's like, goes as the square of if it's too short, and then it's like linear in the other direction. So it's biased towards longer things. Now this is a ridiculous feature. It brings in an FFmpeg dependency. It uses dynamic programming. I've literally never needed to use dynamic programming outside of an interview, but apparently this is what we've all been practicing for. Like it was this. And if this were a commercial product, I'm sure I would have prioritized things like user accounts or filtering by tag, or there's all kinds of little UI problems with it. But honestly, this is my favorite part of the application. I use it all the time. I always use that segmented feed. It's great. Okay, so now I've told you about a few of my big projects, but I don't want to leave you with the impression that every project you do has to be something big, has to grow over the course of years. Some of my most satisfying uses of programming are, for myself, are times when I had a question that I wanted to answer, and I felt that I could use a computer to answer that question. So for example, a few years ago, I noticed that when I went to the gym at Google, I was like really strong. I could lift a ton of weight. I could do the whole rack on tricep push downs, like 180 pounds. Oh, this is great. I'm so strong. But when I went out traveling in the hotels and stuff, I would have to set the rack at like halfway. I'm like, wow. So there's two obvious solutions. One, if you're at Google, like it makes you really strong. Or two, traveling makes you really weak. Both good hypotheses. There's one less likely one, which is that pulleys possibly could have some leverage. And I had to rule this out. So I figured, all right, I'll try and quantify how much leverage a pulley can actually apply. So what I did was I took a luggage scale that you use to lift up your luggage. And I just did like upright rows at every level of the plates, and then I plotted it. And it turns out there was actually leverage, 2.2x leverage. So I took this, I plopped it into a Jupyter notebook. Well, it was a Colab because I wanted to share it with everyone at Google, and Colab's like hosted Jupyter notebooks. And it was easy to share, and it made this nice plot with matplotlib, and NumPy gave me a nice line of fit. So then I knew how much weight I was actually lifting. Disappointed that I'm not super strong though. Another example like this is a project I did about 14 years ago. Like back then, podcasts were not nearly as professionally produced as they are today. And I found that there was like an incredible amount of inconsistency between the mastering. Like some of them were really loud and some of them were quiet, but it was usually like fairly consistent for a given podcast, especially for a given episode. But the thing is, they're like very long files. So I wanted to know like, what's the minimum amount of this file that I could read to find out how much I would have to adjust the volume to make them all mastered the same way, like feel exactly the same amount of loudness. I found that, like, as you might expect, reading from the beginning or the end of a file is like not ideal because there's like outro music or like silences or something not consistent with the rest of it. If you jump in the middle, it does better, but it's still fairly inconsistent. Like if you land in the middle of an ad or a period of silence or some music or something, it's not representative of the rest of the podcast. But if you randomly sample, you just take one sample from like just random parts of the file, it turns out that almost always it converged on the true answer within like 2 seconds of audio for a 90-minute, 2-hour-long file. Like no matter how long it was, just randomly sampling from it did really, really well. It was a very interesting result, and it's something I really love to see implemented in a podcast player, specifically AntennaPod, which is open source. Hint, hint, all you developers looking for projects. Another little project I have is that I use Anki all the time. So Anki, if you don't know, is a spaced repetition flashcard system. I use it to, among other things, learn Spanish. And when I learned you could put JavaScript in the cards, that was very dangerous information for me. The method I'm using to learn Spanish initially recommends that you don't do too much reading or pretty much any reading. You're just supposed to listen in context. But I still wanted that spaced repetition. And so what I did was I was like, oh, I'll just use JavaScript to automatically read me the word so I don't have to look at it. I'll just like not read it. I'll just listen to it. And then also I wanted it to be in context, right? So I would have it show, it would read the word, and then it would read the sentence that it was in. And then only then would I look at the card when I wanted to make sure I got it right and read the English translation. And then if you'll notice, I even added this nice little settings button. So if I wanted to see what gets read when, in case I was somewhere where I couldn't listen, but I still want to do the cards. But the thing is, now that I'm already using JavaScript, I realized that it might be nice to hear the words in a lot of different contexts. So what I did was I added something that randomly chooses a sentence from a predefined list of sentences. You encode it in JSON, you put it in a field on the Anki card, like a hidden field, and then it will select one randomly, a different one every day. But then I needed a source of natural, native sounding sentences, right? And you know what's really good at making up random stuff in any language? LLMs. So I wrote this prompt that basically says, given a word, give me a whole bunch of example sentences. And the part of this I'm most proud of, that I like the most, is this line, which is actually quite small to read, but basically says that when you're making up example sentences, if it's an interesting, like if it's a bonus, like an interesting fact, that's going to stick in my head a lot better. So I want you to use that when you can. And LLMs apparently love amazing animal facts, as do we all. Mostly they seem real too, also. Some of them are completely made up. But like this one's real. Common nightingale has 1,000 different sounds. I was for sure that the nightingale doesn't sing louder on full moons. I was like, that's got to be made up. No, that one's real too. So, but now I'm far enough along in learning Spanish that the concern about reading isn't so big a deal, and I'm actually reading a lot more. And reading is a great source of vocabulary. So what I've started doing is I wrote a script that can extract annotations from an ebook. And so when I read, anytime there's a word that I don't know, I highlight it. And then later I sync it all to my computer. And then my script will pick it up and plop it in there. It'll generate some extra sentences to go along with it if it's a brand new word. Otherwise, it kind of merges it in. And you can see it also keeps track of the source. This is very important to me because I need to know if it came from a Jorge Luis Borges book, because if it is, I do not incorporate it into my language. This guy talks in a very obscure kind of language. Half the time I would look up words, I wouldn't know the word in English. In case you want to know, an incunable or an incunabulum is a book published before 1501. Thank you, Jorge. Okay, so this was all well and good, but I found that with all these new words coming in, I was seeing a lot of conflicts with words that were already in the deck. And I was spending a lot of time resolving this because it was like they have different definitions and I don't know how to merge them. There's no super automated way to do it. So I was like, I'll make a user interface. So I whipped up this little user interface in textual that made it easier to resolve conflicts. And you know what? I'm realizing now that not every project is big is not the best title for this slide. And in fact, it's because I have tricked you. Because the point of this little exercise was actually to say that sometimes your small projects, when you're enjoying them and you're, getting use out of them, they have a way of blossoming and turning into big projects. Great, so this brings me to another point, which is the role of LLMs in bespoke applications. When I first conceived of this talk, I did not propose to discuss LLMs at all because they were not that useful 1 or 2 years ago. But I'm finding that the ones we have now are really, really good at this thing, and they're getting this kind of thing, and they're getting better every month. For one thing, they let you take on more ambitious projects. I would never have done this textual thing because I didn't know textual, and I had 1 day to do this. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to time box it. I'm going to ask an LLM to make this for me. It gave me something that was broken and did not work. But a little back and forth, and I had something debuggable. And within 1 day, I had something that was actually quite beautiful. Part of that is leveraging how good of a library textual is. But another part of it is just leveraging the fact that the LLM could do a lot of the boilerplate for me. It could answer my questions about what could be going wrong. It could help a little bit with the debugging. So I would never have been able to accomplish this without the leverage that the LLM provides. And I feel like it gives me more confidence to be ambitious in my projects. Similarly, on the extreme low end, LLMs can make some of the easy stuff basically free. When I was putting together this talk, I didn't have a lot of time, but I needed a way to cut a chunk out of a bunch of screenshots, like just the middle. So I wrote up a quick prompt and I was like, look, this is what I want. And if it doesn't work, I'm just not going to use it. But I got results and they worked the first time. I didn't have to remember anything about bash syntax. I didn't have to read any man pages. It was great. And the other thing that I'm finding with ML models is that they can act as kind of novel components in your programs, like doing things that were previously difficult or maybe even impossible to do. A long time ago, I had similar ideas about this kind of Anki deck, but I had a lot of trouble generating sentences, doing headword stemming, all that kind of like complicated NLP stuff. And now I just send it to an LLM and it's like simple. I would have never been able to do this. Like what I do now, when I hear a new Spanish word, I just pop it into my org mode notebook. It gets synced somewhere, and then occasionally I will copy paste it. I pipe it directly into this little Python program I wrote that goes and says, hey, clean this up. Some of it doesn't have definitions. Some of it does have definitions. They might be wrong. But it very consistently gives me something that's right. It gives me the right gender. It gives me decent context on this thing. And there are also non-LLM ML models that are getting better all the time. A few years ago, I read a blog post by my friend and open source and Python legend Sumana, where she talks about using self-hosted instances of Whisper for speech recognition. And this inspired me to set up a pipeline where I can take personal voice memos. Usually it's things like, oh, like my son walked for the first time, or like, this is when he learned how to ride a bike, or like, just progress notes on my son. And then I use SyncThing to automatically sync those recordings to a server at my house. And then Whisper will take over. It'll automatically transcribe all that, which gets synced back to my phone. And then, when someone says like, oh, when was the first time he walked? I can just do a text search. It's very convenient. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about with ML. But I also want to say that most of this talk has been about programming. But I actually think building for yourself goes beyond software, right? If you have the ability to make clothing, that's amazing. You can literally tailor things for yourself. Woodworking, you can solve lots of physical problems. This is something I built with my electronic skills from before I was a programmer, but after I was a chemist, physicist, something like that. And basically what it is, it's a haptic compass. So there's like a battery in there, and that little thing on the front is a compass. And then in the brim of the hat is 12 vibration motors. And there's I think an Arduino or something in the back, and it just calculates which direction is north relative to the hat. And so you put it on and you walk around with this hat on, and then you just always are like, you always know which direction is north. It's quite an interesting sensation. And I wanted to experience it, and they don't sell these things. I'm interested to get back to this, but I would like something washable. Okay, so here are the lessons I'm going to leave you with. 1, you can use whatever tech stack you want. Python, Rust, maybe some less traditional stacks. Projects are also a great way to learn. Pretty much every one of these projects, I started it off by saying, like, I didn't know anything about this, but I figured I would try. There's a reason why Alsweigert's Automate the Boring Stuff is one of the most popular books for learning programming in general and Python specifically, is because projects are a really great way to learn. You're motivated to keep learning. Obviously, as I talked about, you can use programming to answer questions for yourself. This is especially true in Python. Python is like the home of data science. There's lots of APIs, lots of data you can work with. Also, your projects don't have to pay. My example is the Chord identification method trainer. Kind of looks like an app. Presumably some people would pay for it, but I don't really care about that. I want them to just use it because I made it. And it's also okay to make something that's just for you. This is an example of something I made back when I lived in Houston. There were 2 different ways for me to get back home from work, and they were both about the same, but they depended on traffic, and the traffic was very varied. So what I did was I wrote a script that would automatically download the traffic map and then all the traffic cameras between my work and my house. So I could instantly see which road is more trafficy and which one, had more like rain or something on it. Houston is very heterogeneous in weather. Anyway, it would automatically set that as my desktop background. So then every 30 seconds I could look and get an updated traffic map. Very specific to me, but it was really great. And then the last thing I want to say is it's also great to tell other people about your work. So if you have a project like this, make a blog post, sign up for a lightning talk, And if you don't have a project, and hopefully I've inspired you to go out and make a project, I would really love it if next year you would sign up for a lightning talk at PyCon US 2026 and tell us all about it. Okay, so that's my talk. Here's more information. On my website, you'll be able to find this site, and there will be links. Then these links will be clickable and not just something you're looking at and trying to divine what's under the blue text. All right, thank you very much.